Alright, we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, welcome back. We'll be talking about English again today for the first half. I wrote this breakdown back on the board because I'd like to think we're going to get through all of these things, and we'll cover all of them at least a little bit the times that I'm here. So last week we talked about punctuation, and we basically covered all of the punctuation you could possibly see on the ACT. So overall, I would expect us to do a pretty good job on those questions. And I put those in that easy category because most of the time when you recognize a punctuation question, we'll probably get it done in 5 to 10 seconds. All you have to do is recognize it, know the rule, and then apply that rule. So those questions in general should go pretty fast the more you practice. So all of these will go pretty routinely quickly, and then these ones will be the ones that are more time consuming like we talked about last week. And just to reiterate, I'm not saying these questions are easy to answer. It's not that you're going to get them right a ton. It's that they're going to go faster. That's why I call them easy, and these ones are going to take a little bit more thought, so that's why I call them hard. So yeah, we covered punctuation last week. Today I want to cover grammar and usage and sentence structure together. And if you look at the percentages, this is a pretty big portion of the test. And I would say in general, 80% of these types of questions are going to be really, really, really easy. You'll see, as English speakers, you'll realize that grammar is not correct or that sentence structure is not correct. There's going to be a few rules we'll cover today that may go against your intuition and be a little bit not what you're used to. So those are the ones we really want to look out for. Like I said last week, it's important to trust your intuition on this test, but not trust it blindly. There's going to be some rules that go against that, and we'll cover those in a minute here. So I have 6 rules that I call the golden grammar rules, the ones that you're going to see the most often. There will be a few more, but they come up so little that I'm not going to cover them. There's 6 here, and then there's one that I'm going to talk about at the end that may come up a little bit, but I think most of us know that one pretty well, so we'll get to it when we get there. And then if we do have time left over, I would like to do a little bit of a practice test, just so that those of you who haven't done that before can get a little bit of feel of what the English test will be like. So yeah, let's get into our grammar and sentence structure rules, and I'm going to call them the golden grammar rules, so that's what I would write at the top of the page. Golden grammar rules. And we'll go one by one. Each of them has a different level of complexity to it. Some of them are pretty routine and easy. They may seem, but the examples might be a little tricky and it might be the other way. So we'll get into each of them individually. Let's start with, I think this one is the most prominent and the most routine. And it seems easy, but more often than not, people are getting questions like this wrong because it's easy in theory. I'll write down the rule first. Okay, so rule number 1 is that subjects and verbs should always, without fail, agree. Now, there's never a time where this isn't going to apply, so I'm going to write the word always. I try to use that word sparingly because most of the time there are exceptions, but there's not exceptions to this. There's never a time where a subject and a verb in a sentence should not agree with each other. Does everyone know what a subject and a verb is, first of all? Okay, just in case someone doesn't, the subject of a sentence is the thing, the noun. Whatever is happening is to that thing, that person, that place, thing, whatever. It's normally going to be a noun. And a verb is just an action. So whenever I'm saying some sort of thing is having an action, they have to agree with each other. So I can't say he run. That doesn't make any sense because they don't agree. It should be he runs, right? So we know those ones pretty straightforward. Let's go through an example quick. So the way I'm going to do these rules is I'm going to write an example, and there's going to be something wrong with it based on the rule we just covered. I'll call on someone to pick out what's wrong and correct it. So I want you guys to be participating today as much as we can. Okay. Okay, so the sentence I wrote up on the board, in case anyone can't see, says the students seated in the classroom listens well. Can someone tell me what's wrong with that? Yeah, go ahead.
Listen should have no S.
Should have no S, it should be listen, right? Good. So we can see here, it's clear the students listen, not the students listens. Now, what I just did there, a lot of people take for granted. This is the best way and the best strategy to check if your subjects and your verbs agree. Because there's going to be a lot of times where you won't know. There's going to be a lot of filler stuff in between. The ACT likes to put a ton of different words in between. No matter how many words there are or what they are, the subject and the verb should always agree. A lot of the times they interrupt with prepositional phrases, appositives like we talked about last week. There might be subordinating clauses in between. There might be modifications and modifiers or whatever there is. Forget about it. Just focus on these two things. Now, what I just did there, when I said the students listen, not the students listens. In theory, what I'm doing is just kind of eliminating all of the stuff in between and just going from the students.
Send a message to.
Okay. Sorry, guys. Turn that on. Just thought I'd say, hey Siri. So the students listen, and I'm eliminating everything else in between. So whenever you get a thing that you're unsure about, eliminate everything else in between. Let's go to another example quick. What color is it? Alright, for anyone that can't see, the sentence up here says, the basket of strawberries, nuts, and cheese were passed around. Can someone tell me what's wrong with that one? Nobody? Don't make me call on someone. Okay, go ahead.
It should be was.
It should be was passed around. Right. Not were, but we want was. And why is that? Can you explain?
Because it's basket, so then it should be basket was, not basket were.
Exactly, good. So the important thing, what she just did there, was realize what the subject is. Now there's a lot of words here that are plural, they're in a list, but those things aren't the subject. So she did a very good job of identifying what the subject is, eliminating the book describes it as eliminating the fat. That's what they call this strategy as, but I think that's kind of weird. So I just eliminate the words in between. And she did a very good job of that, identifying that basket was the subject. So it would be the basket was, not the basket were. Does that make sense? So it's important to follow this rule. The most important thing is to identify what the subject is. If you identify what the subject is, these questions become very, very easy. Keep in mind, try to cross out stuff in between, and normally you'll be good. Does that make sense? Does anyone have any questions about this rule? Online people, feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question if you have any. Does anyone have any questions online?
No, this makes sense.
Okay, awesome. Good. Let's go to the next rule. Does everyone have this written down? I get to erase. Okay, cool. All right. This next rule is about pronouns. What the heck? There's not one here. is a tricky word to spell. Hold on. Antecedents. There we go. Okay. The next rule, again, is an agreement thing. This one says that pronouns should agree in both, I'm going to underline these things because they're important, both gender and number with their antecedents. Now, I don't know if many of you have heard the word antecedent before, but basically that means the words that the pronoun is referring back to, whatever it is. So don't worry about knowing that word. It's not really important. It's just part of the rule. So they should just agree with the words that they're referring back to. Does everyone have this written down? Okay. Let's go to an example here. Alright, so the sentence I've written up here says, the players went back to his locker room. Can someone raise their hand and tell me what's wrong with that? Yeah, go ahead.
Players doesn't match his.
Yeah, it shouldn't be his, it should be what?
There.
There, yeah. The players went back to their locker room. So do you see here the pronoun is his or their, and it has to agree with the antecedent, so that would be the players here. And because they didn't agree, that's not correct English. So yeah, that one makes a ton of sense. It's pretty straightforward. And there is a small note that even though they're technically in the English language, is there someone? Okay. So even though they're in the English language isn't gendered, it's more important that it fits the number here, so that's why it's still okay. There is the only word in English that isn't gendered of the pronouns, basically, so don't worry about that. This is the only time you don't have to think about it, but if it gets to his or her, then we have to make sure that that's correct based on the previous word. Let's go to another example. Okay, yeah, let's just go into it. Just make a little more room here. Now this one's important, guys, so keep in mind what we're doing here. Okay, if you cannot see, this rule, or not this rule, excuse me, this sentence says, each of the boys dances with their partner well. Is there anything wrong with this one? What do we think? Okay, how many people, raise your hands, how many people think there's nothing wrong with this? Okay, and how many people think there is something wrong? Who's someone that said nothing, or sorry, someone who said that there is something wrong, can they explain themselves? Can I have you in the back?
I think there has to be his,
Why do you think that?
because, like, every boy is separate. They have their own, like, dancing partner.
Yeah, actually that's correct, good. So I'm gonna cover a rule here in a minute that explains why, but again, we identified our pronoun right here. Want to change that to his in this scenario. Now this is the most common slip up on the ACT for grammar rules. Out of every single grammar rule, more often than not people are getting this specific one wrong. There's a very specific rule that explains it, and we'll talk about it here in a second. I'll erase this and explain, but even though boys is plural, it would make sense to say there. It says each of the boys. That leads us perfectly into this rule. Exactly, and this still goes under pronouns, should agree with the antecedents. So I'm not going to write a new number here, but this is an important sub-rule that's labeled as this. Oh, I should capitalize that. Oops. The rule is each is one body. Now, you'll understand why it's written like that in a second, but basically what it means, any word that contains each one or body needs a singular pronoun. Now this is one of those that goes against our intuition, because when I say each of the boys, we're thinking their, not his, because we said boys, right? But if you remember this rule, the way it's written actually really helps you understand what it means. Where you're saying each is one body. So there's one. So you're going to make it singular each time. So if I said each of the boys, well actually that's singular. So each of the boys dances with his partner. Well, does that make sense? Or, for example, one is another common one that comes up in everyone or no one. Those are actually singular. So if you were to say every one of the boys, you would say every one of the boys dances with his partner, not their partner. Or everyone is doing their job. Sounds really correct, but it actually should be everyone is doing his or her job. And then body obviously would be anybody, nobody, those type of words. All actually need singular pronouns, not plural ones. Does that make sense? So this is a really important one because it completely goes against your intuition. The first time I was taught this rule, I don't think I registered it very well. The tutor told me this is the rule, and then she gave me an example, and there was an example sheet of 10 problems, and I got every single one of them wrong, because I just went with what my intuition said. So whenever you see something like this, be very careful, because it's not what you think most of the time. Does that make sense? Are we good with this rule? Online people, does anyone have a question with that one? Okay, I'm going to assume that means no. So, that is rule number 2. Those two are by far the most common grammar ones. Now I'm going to throw in, how many more are there here? There's 2 more grammar rules, I would say, and the others are more sentence structure related, but these 2 grammar rules are a little bit less common. You may not see them as much as those previous 2, but they're equally as important, because I would say these 2 are missed a lot too, because I don't know exactly what it is, but people miss these quite a bit because they're just not common. This one especially is just a little bit weird, the terminology of it. I'll show you here. So, possessive pronouns. Possessive. Should be used before gerunds. This is another tricky word maybe we haven't heard before, gerund. Does anyone know what that means? Okay, I was just curious, I don't know. But gerunds are basically, in English, are ing words. So anything basically that ends with an ing is a gerund. Let's simplify it to that. Yeah, so let's actually write that up here too. Gerunds are just ing words, basically. And the important thing here is, how do I say this properly? Let's just go into an example, actually. I think that might help. Okay. Okay. So, up here at the moment, I have written, him biting his sleeves annoyed his mom a lot. Now, based on the rule I just told you guys, can someone tell me, let's start with, is there something wrong with that? Give me something, come on. Is there something wrong with that? I'm about to call on somebody. Shrithaj, is there something wrong with that?
Yeah.
Yeah, what's wrong?
I don't know.
Okay, that's okay. Do we know what possessive pronouns are? Sorry, I guess I didn't really explain that very well. A possessive pronoun is something that you would say when I'm talking about a book that belongs to you. This is how I think of it. If any time there's a book that belongs to somebody. So if I'm saying a book belongs to him, I would say what book? His book, right? Or a book belongs to her, then I would say her book. Or a book belongs to me, I would say my book. So those are possessive pronouns. The pronouns that display possession of something. Now I'm telling you, possessive pronouns should be used before gerunds, which are ing words. We have an ing word here, right? Biting. Now, before that, I should use a possessive pronoun. Is him Is him a possessive pronoun? No. So what should that be? Go ahead, Shrithaj, what should it be? So if you're talking about a book that belongs to him, what would you say?
His.
His book. So this would be his, right? Good. Yeah. So this should actually be his. Now, this one doesn't always make perfect sense because it's kind of weird that it's not him biting his sleeves, but his biting his sleeves. That annoys his mom. So this is another one I would try to commit to memory because it's not exactly intuition based again. You're always going to use a possessive pronoun before a gerund. It's kind of weird. And the interesting thing about this is you could say this in different ways. So like maybe mom is annoyed by him. That's fine. But she's annoyed by his biting. So those things, I'm saying mom is annoyed both times, but if you're talking about his biting, then it has to be his, not him. And if it's just him, then fine. Does that make sense? So just remember, if you see an ing word, you have to use a possessive pronoun before it. Does that make sense? I don't have another example for this one, but if we want another one, we can definitely do another one. Do you guys want another example?
Can you do another one?
Yeah, for sure. Let's go. Wait, hold on. Yeah, actually that's fine. Okay. This one's actually kind of funny. I always enjoyed her telling of jokes. So, the interesting thing is her works a little bit different than him and his, because if I want to say a book belonged to her, it's her book. Versus if I want to say a book belongs to him, it's his book. So those two things are different, versus her is actually the same. So this, her is the possessive pronoun here. So this would be perfectly fine. I always enjoyed her telling of jokes. So here we have our ing word, our gerund, and before it we used a possessive pronoun. So that's okay. Does that make sense? Or let's say we're talking about a group of people, like a group of comedians. I guess this one's kind of obvious, but It's not them. I always enjoyed them telling of jokes. I mean, it's clearly wrong. This should be their, right? Because that's possessive. Their telling of jokes. Does that kind of make sense? The idea is basically just look out for ing words and the pronoun before. Are we all good with that? Okay. Online people, do you guys have any questions? Okay, I'll take that as a no. Alright. Let's go to, is this number 4 now? Okay, this I would argue is the hardest grammar rule because I don't know what it is, but people get confused when they hear words like gerund that they don't know. So just follow along with me, and we're going to simplify these terms because they're going to be confusing at first, but we're going to simplify them a lot. So this is another pronoun rule, believe it or not. We're going to say pronouns should always be in the correct case. Now what that means, there's two different cases of pronouns. I'll write them up here in a second. They can be subjective or objective. Now this is where I lose most people. Because, well, what the heck is a subjective case pronoun? And what is an objective case pronoun? We're going to talk about that in a second here, but their definitions are actually pretty simple. Did everyone have time to write this down? Actually, sorry, I don't want to rush. Okay, I'll let you guys finish writing. Okay, the main idea here to differentiate between the two cases, a subjective pronoun, hence the name, can be used as the subject of a sentence, whereas the objective case means it's used as the object of the sentence. That's the main difference. I'm just going to quick write that so we don't forget. Okay, so this is how you differentiate between them. Still, it may be confusing because, well, how do you know if it's the subject? How do you know if it's the object? I'll give you a trick for this in a second. It's very similar to his book versus if a book belongs to him. How you figure out if a pronoun is possessive. There's another trick that I'm going to tell you once everyone's done writing this down. I don't want to rush. Alright, we got it? Okay, now how do you tell if something is subjective or objective? This is the trick right here. Always plug it into this formula. You can use whatever word you want here, it doesn't really matter. Chips, sandwich, grapes, whatever. You're going to check if the pronoun fits into this formula. Whatever the pronoun is, eat or eats the chips. It's that simple. So let's say it's between, so the two most common ones are when you're talking about yourself. I and me are the two different pronouns you can use here. So now I want to know which one's subjective and which one's objective. Let's plug them both into here. Oh, I didn't make clear. If it fits into this, then that means it's subjective. Sorry, I did not say that. Forgot. Okay. Let's say I'm discussing I and me, the ones referring to yourself. Let's plug in I. So I eat the chips. That makes sense, right? So that means I is subjective. Now, let's plug in me. Me eats the chips. Or me eat the chips. I mean, unless you're a toddler, that doesn't make sense. So that would be objective because it doesn't fit in that formula. Now, if you want another formula, use another one, yeah. I always like mom. If it fits into this formula, mom yelled at pronoun, then it's objective. So now let's go back to me and I again. So when I say mom yelled at I, does that make any sense? No. So I is not objective, it's subjective. Let's go to the other one. If mom yelled at me, that makes sense. So that means me is objective. So just from there we figured out I, subjective, me, objective. You can do that with anything. Like, let's go with what other examples do we have? Like he or him, he and him. Him ate the chips? No. He ate the chips. So that's subjective. Now let's say mom yelled at he. No. Mom yelled at him. So that will be objective. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's how you're going to figure it out. Did everyone have time to write that down? Good? Okay. I'm going to erase this. I'll give you guys an example here. This time, I'm actually just going to leave the pronoun open, and then we're going to, as a class, decide which one is correct. We're going to vote. Let's start with this one. Forgot how foggy glasses get and masks. So annoying. Okay. The sentence I have written up here says Gina and he or him, we're going to discuss that, are the most popular couple at school. Now, our intuition definitely says one of them is more correct than the other, but let's actually go through and solve how we would. So first, we need to know, are we the subject or the object of the sentence? Now to do that, you would have to figure out, I guess I didn't explain this before. We're going to do it now. Let's do this one together, actually. First thing you have to do is the pronoun you're using, are we the subject or the object of the sentence? How to figure that out is are they the ones doing the action, or is the action being done to them? So if they're the ones doing the action, they're the subject. If the action is being done to them, they're the object. So here, our verb here, it's not exactly like, how do I say this? It's not exactly that they're doing something, but here they're the subject of the sentence, where they are the most popular couple. So the action is not being done to them, they are the action. So in this scenario, they're the subject. Does that kind of make sense? We'll do another one to explain in the other way, but okay, so Gina and he or him, whoever the guy is, are the subject of the sentence. That's the first step. Now, let's figure out which one of these is subjective, is what we need to do. Let's plug it into our formulas before. So, let's start with the first formula, whatever eats the sandwich or eats the chips. He eats the chips or him eats the chips? Which one is correct? He. Good. So he is subjective. And the other one, mom yelled at he or mom yelled at him?
Him.
Him. Good. Mom yelled at him. So that would mean that's objective. Now, when we're going through this, it actually should be Gina and he, because we need the subjective case here. So as weird as that sounds, Gina and he are the most popular couple at school. That's grammatically correct. Not Gina and him. Gina and he. Now, that kind of goes against intuition, I know. There'll be another one here. Let's do another one. Okay. Stop telling Michael and I or me what to do. Now, we are not the subject anymore, we're the object, because the action is being done to us. So stop telling Michael and I what to do. So now, we're not the subject of the sentence anymore. The verb is being done to us, rather than the other way around. Does that make sense? The action is being done to the pronoun, instead of being the other way around, where the pronoun is doing the action. Does that sort of make sense? Yeah? Okay. So, if we know that much, we know that this is supposed to be objective, not subjective. Let's figure out which one is subjective and which one is objective. We've done this one a little bit, but we'll still go through it, how I would on the test. Okay, I want to know, we need the objective one, let's figure it out. Okay, the first formula says blank eats the chips, or eats the chips. I eat the chips or me eat the chips? Which one's correct? I. Good. So that means I is subjective. Alright. Mom yells at I or mom yells at me? Me. Good. So that would be objective. So in this scenario, since the sentence requires an objective case pronoun, we want me, not I. Does that kind of make sense? So the important part of it is being able to figure out, do you need to be the subject or do you need to be the object of the sentence? Now, there is a little trick that right now, if it's not making a ton of sense, what I like to do is simplify it to just one pronoun, eliminate everything else, and then maybe you'll be able to figure it out with intuition. So it may not make a lot of sense, let's say, but you'll be able to tell. Here, this one makes a ton of sense. Let's say, just forget about Michael for a minute. Stop telling I what to do. Or stop telling me what to do. Which one makes more sense? Stop telling me what to do. So that one just fits in. How about this one? I know it's not going to make a ton of sense because you can't be a couple by yourself. But let's say, pretend Gina's not here. And now we're talking about, and we'd have to fix the conjugation of the verb, obviously. Not are, but is right now. Just pretend with me. He is the most popular couple at school. Or him is the most popular couple at school. Well, now it's clear it's he, not him. Even though it doesn't make a ton of sense to be a couple by yourself, I know. But since you cut it down to just one pronoun rather than two, it actually made it a lot easier. And a lot of the times you'll get stuff like this, where the sentence still actually makes perfect sense. And now the reason this rule is super impactful is this is actually the difference between who and whom also. I know a lot of people have questions about that on the ACT. Who and whom are actually just separated by case. One of them is subjective and one of them is objective. So who ate the chips or who eats the chips? That makes sense. So that means that's subjective. And mom yelled at who or mom yelled at whom? Actually should be whom. So that would be objective. So that's the big difference, that you can plug who and whom into the same rule. Now, I'll give you one last shortcut or little trick here for who and whom. If you're getting confused with that, and you get who and whom are a little bit confusing. So pretend whom is he, pretend whom is him. And they function the same way. So if you ever get confused, I would just switch it to he and him. And it'll make it significantly easier. You'll be able to see that because we use those words and we don't always use who and whom that much. So yeah, we'll come across those in the practices we do as a class sooner or later, and that will become a lot easier. Okay, this is definitely the hardest rule. Overall, are we doing okay on this? Does this make sense? It's a little bit tricky, subjective and objective cases, but we'll learn them, we'll practice with them a little bit more, and it's going to become easier. Online people, are you guys okay here so far? Alright, I saw a thumbs up emoji. I feel like that's a good thing. Now, that's basically the 4 major grammar rules. We're going to talk about a few more that I'm going to loop under golden grammar rules. But they're actually sentence structure rules. So, just 2 of them, and I'll talk about one of them out loud because I think as a class we already know that one pretty well. The first thing, I guess this is number 5. Sentences should be written in parallel form. Don't worry if you've never heard that before. It's actually really easy to understand. With this one, actually, I don't think I'm going to explain the rule before I just put up an example and we're going to vote as a class which one's correct. And it's going to be easier that way. I think you guys will figure it out by yourselves. I don't think you'll even need me to explain it. Let's see. So, just going to go into the example here. So, reading, cooking, and interior design are Barbie's favorite hobbies. Don't know if that's true, but we'll go with it. Reading, cooking, and interior design are Barbie's favorite hobbies. The first question I have is there something wrong with that sentence? I'll give you a second to think about it, and then we're going to vote as a class. So I want everybody to at least weigh in. Alright, so first, raise your hand if you think there's nothing wrong with that sentence and that's grammatically correct. Okay, and raise your hand if you think there is something grammatically incorrect about that sentence. Okay, a lot of you didn't vote, but that's okay. The ones that did are onto the right track. Someone who raised their hand that thought there's something wrong with the sentence, can you explain? Yeah, in the back.
Should be interior design.
Interior designing. Why is that?
So that they all know.
So that they all match. Yeah, so they're written in parallel form. This shouldn't be design. It should be designing. Good. Now, basically what parallel form is just to make all of the verbs in the same conjugation so that they sound the same. And this especially happens when you're making lists, where reading, cooking, and interior designing, so that they all end in ings, they're all gerunds. Does that make sense? Okay, I have one more example we'll put up here. It doesn't always have to be in groups of 3, let's just say. There sometimes it'll be a little bit different. So, for example, he planted roses to flank the front door daisies flank the backyard. Okay, we're gonna vote again as a class. I'll let everyone write it down. He planted roses to flank the front door and daisies which flank the backyard. Okay, so first, if you think there is nothing wrong with this sentence and it is grammatically correct, raise your hand. Okay, and if you think there is something incorrect about this sentence, raise your hand. Okay, come on, I need you guys to vote, but will someone who did raise their hand for it's not grammatically correct, care to explain? I know you two raised your hands. Will one of you explain? Why'd you vote that way?
Which should be 2, so it matches.
So it matches, exactly. We want to write this in parallel form again. Perfect. So it doesn't make sense to say he planted roses to flank the front yard, and then all of a sudden switch the sentence of the structure. Wait, structure of the sentence, sorry. Flip the structure of the sentence to make it daisies which flank. Let's get rid of that, and let's have it match what we had the first time. So to make it correct and make our parallel structure match, he planted roses to flank the front door and daisies to flank the backyard. Do you see how that's more parallel? How fits together a little bit better than the previous example? Okay, good. So that's what parallel form is. We want them basically to just stay in the same fashion throughout a sentence. If it's possible. Well, sometimes it won't be, but does that make sense? Yeah.
So is it, like, if you don't have it as parallel structure, will it
Will it be wrong? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Technically, no. But part of this test isn't just identifying what's wrong, it's identifying what could be better. So maybe it's not particularly wrong
Yeah.
per se, but every single English linguist will tell you that this is better than the previous. So that's the idea. As an editor, if you had written that sentence and brought it into an editor, that, like editing your book, they would right away fix it for this.
Okay.
Does that make sense? So again, obviously we're editors. We want it to make the most sense and be the most clear and have the best sentence structure, and that would follow that a little bit better. Good question. Does anyone else have anything? Online people, are you guys good? Can we move to the next one? Okay, another thumbs up emoji. Good, good. All right. Last rule. And this one again is going to deal with sentence structure. If you guys remember, sentence structure is a big part of the test. It's the only one over 20%. So you might see a lot of these questions actually. But the 6th rule is a little bit different because it doesn't exactly pertain directly. It doesn't always apply directly, but it's a more general rule, is what I'm trying to say. I think I mentioned it last week actually, but it's a very popular rule amongst English professionals. And it's the economy rule. Now, the economy rule is pretty simple. And it just says, you can say something in less words I'm actually going to break the rule in the definition because I think it's kind of funny. If you can say something in less words, say it in less words. It's always going to be true that way. However, ironically, the sentence I just wrote, the definition of the rule, doesn't exactly follow it. So, can someone tell me a way to say what I just said in less words? Let's say, particularly with this part right here. How can we make that more concise? Yeah, go ahead.
Delete it.
So you want the sentence to say, if you can say something in less words,
Oh, never mind.
how do you make this more concise? So just take out some words maybe, or change it to be a little bit more. Yeah, go ahead.
Delete in less words.
In less words. Good. That's what I was going for. We don't need in less words because we already said that. So you could say it, do it, whatever you want here. But do you see how we just cut out some of the flab of the sentence? We didn't need to repeat those words because we already knew them. I know a very popular English professor that thinks anytime you say something in too many words, it's almost insulting to the reader. That like you're kind of belittling them and acting like they won't understand if you say it in less words. So obviously I don't exactly believe that, but I would say all linguists agree that it's never okay to just add flab unless it's like a poem or something. You can add as much flab as you want. But in the case of the ACT, we're going to try to keep it as minimal as possible. And this has two mini applications to it. So, one is basically this that we just said. This is one part of it. And the second part, it's a little bit different, but it kind of fits the same thing. Never, ever, ever, ever repeat something in the same sentence specifically. And I'll show you what that means exactly in an example here in a minute, but say stuff in less words and don't repeat is the idea of the economy rule. Does that make sense? Okay. I'm going to give you guys an example here. And I'll ask you guys to fix it for me because I don't know, you guys are the editors, so you fix it, not me. The first one I'm going to say the first sentence I have written up there says, it gets hot in the summer months of June, July, and August. Now, does anyone have a suggestion on how we can say that in less words or not repeat? Yeah, go ahead.
Just say it gets hot in June, July, and August.
Yeah, good. The summer months, it's kind of implied. I mean, I actually don't need that either. Because well, the summer months are June, July, and August. So obviously. So this is an example of kind of repeating, kind of saying something in too many words. It's flabby. We don't really need that. It should be more concise that it gets hot in June, July, and August. Good. I'm going to give you one more. This is the worst thing ever. Please don't ever write a sentence like this. Now, just to be clear, this is a real example from an actual ACT. So, as ridiculous as it sounds, stuff like this actually does happen. The sentence I have written up there says, the joke made me laugh because it was comical and humorous. Does anyone have an idea of how we can make that a little bit better? Sorry, I guess I asked too quickly. You guys are still writing, but the joke made me laugh because it was comical and humorous. How do we cut that down?
Just removed because it was comical and humorous.
Yeah. It's kind of ironic here because, well, these two words mean literally exactly the same thing. Comical and humorous mean the same thing, that it was funny. So, don't need one. And then it's also obvious the joke made me laugh. So if it made you laugh, obviously it's funny. Obviously it's comical. Obviously it's humorous. Don't need to explain that. So you could just stop at, the joke made me laugh. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay, and there is one last thing that isn't particularly a rule, so I'm not going to write it down, but I want everyone to be aware of it. And they group this with sentence structure mostly, but I consider it more grammatical. They want to make sure that every sentence you write on the ACT or that's written should be not a run-on and not a fragment. So the ACT defines a run-on sentence as two sentences that are lacking punctuation to separate them, and a fragment is something that isn't an entire sentence by itself. So a fragment you could also use as a dependent clause. So there might be some times where you have a sentence. I might just write this down so it'll be easier. Okay, I have two different sentences here that we all know are independent clauses. I'm simplifying them for the sake of explanation, but they won't be this obvious. But I went to the store, I bought milk. Normally we would put periods at the end of both of these, right? And now that makes perfect sense. I went to the store, I bought milk. What if I just put a comma here? I went to the store, I bought milk. That's not a sufficient form of punctuation to separate that. Out of curiosity, not you two, does anyone know what that is called? If you put a comma here. No one? Okay, go ahead. What's it called? Comma splice. Good. This is what comma splice refers to. Where you use a comma in place of a period. They might do this on the test, and they'll ask you to recognize, hey, that's not right. That should be a semicolon or a period or something with more strength like that. So that's what happens when you get stuck in a run-on. And they might do something the opposite, where they leave something as a fragment. So it might be they might just leave something like that. When I went to the store. Well, it's very clear that's not an entire sentence. When I went to the store, what? You're asking for more here. So just be careful. There might be something before it, like I bought milk when I went to the store. Or when I went to the store, they were all out of half and halves or whatever. So don't leave sentences as run-ons. Don't leave sentences as fragments on the test. Make sure your punctuation fits properly. They put that as sentence structure. Wouldn't consider it sentence structure, but yeah. So those are the golden grammar rules. And now, of what we've covered, we should be able to be pretty comfortable on most of the tests. Those easy questions should be easy. That we know these things, they should go pretty quickly. We're out of time today, but next time we'll work in some practice time too, so we can see what the tests exactly look like, and how to apply these rules, and how they fit into the actual test. But I think that's it for today. So you guys can go on break now. You'll have